VR's come a long way, and now we've got pretty much every genre represented well with decent graphics and pretty good playability and just tons of options depending on if you're playing through Steam or if you've got a Quest. Whatever your method of accessing a VR product, there's something out there for everybody. Welcome back to Society Case Files. My name is Robert, and today I'm going to talk about the VR game Warhammer 40,000 Battle Sister. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Otherwise, I'm going to dive right in. Battle Sister came out in 2022. I picked it up for the Quest pretty much right away. Didn't really play it until more recently, and that's because I just didn't have the space. Now, my initial VR purchase was a Vive, and that thing had the little lighthouse guys that you had to set up, and it was just pretty hefty. I mean, you had a lot of cords that come off of it that go into a little hub, and then that hub plugs into your main computer, and then you've got the little devices that are your sensors, and those have to be plugged in. It was just honestly too inconvenient to really enjoy. The few times I tried it, I did have fun. I played some Fallout 4, I tried Skyrim. It was insane. And honestly, it made me a little sick, and it was kind of worth it. I was really impressed with how far it had come because I hadn't even touched a VR for years and years and years. So when the Quest came out and it offered wireless functionality of it, pretty much no sensors and just works, I tried it. And frankly, I know that some people complain about it, but I have to admit, for me, the convenience is everything, and I'm able to just plug it in and go. And nowadays, I actually have a space to use it in, whereas before I'd have to move all kinds of stuff out of the way in either my dining room or my office, and that just wasn't practical. And then there were cats to deal with. They'd occasionally get involved too. Now that I have a purely open space and nothing gets in the way, I can actually get into some of this stuff. So I went and revisited Battle Sister. Now, I'd already played through the introduction, so you're not going to see that in the footage, but you do get to see what happens after your initial experience in the game. You get attacked by chaos cultists, and you get to run around and do various things. Now, I'm not going to say that this is a perfect experience. There are plenty of times that you'll even see in the footage where I'm trying to reload the weapon and I either drop the weapon or drop the magazine or drop the sword. It's very easy to do that. The way that you actually hold things is there's a button that your basically second and third finger can touch, and you have to hold that in to maintain the grip on whatever it is you're using. Which I guess that's kind of fine in some ways. Like when you're holding the bolter, it does make it feel more like you're actually holding a gun. And because the weapon is smaller, when you're waving it around, it doesn't seem quite as ridiculous as like in Fallout 4. After I left the pistol behind and had a minigun, you're waving that thing around like basically a balloon animal. And it was absurd. It didn't have any weight. And that is what finally broke immersion. When you're using the pistols and stuff, you can kind of forgive certain things. But once you get bigger weapons, it's like, this is a little ridiculous. Now, while I do imagine that a power sword weighs a lot more than it seems to in Battle Sister, it's still super fun to swing it around like a maniac, which you do quite a bit, because once you run out of ammo, that's your weapon. You're going to turn to that, and it's pretty much all on. Now, there's a couple of things about movement I want to discuss as well. So if you don't have a lot of space, you're going to be basically using one of the little thumbsticks to turn, and those turns are somewhat jerky. They basically turn you, I don't know, maybe 10 degrees in any of the directions you move, and it happens fast. So you're just facing forward, and then you're 10 degrees to the left or right. And that motion, it can actually be fairly nauseating. So it is much better if you can turn all the way around in place so that you can avoid using that. Now, motion forward and back is also on one of the thumbsticks. Now, that isn't so bad. It's a gradual motion. It feels pretty much the same as using the WASD keys in a standard first-person shooter. Now, some of the things that are also frustrating come down to the fighting situation. The sword does a pretty good job. You do have to get some momentum behind a strike to actually do damage. So you can't just poke someone like you're trying to stoke a fire. You actually got to get a good swing or a good thrust in to take them out. Now, the big trouble is with the bolter, the bolt pistol in particular. When you're aiming it, even though you can see down the sight, that thing is like going everywhere. It's like an airsoft gun, or more appropriately, like a paintball gun. Have you ever been to the paintball range with one of the little stubby ones that you rent? You can aim it directly at a target and watch the ball sort of veer to the left, the right, up, down. It goes anywhere but straight because it just doesn't have the barrel to really propel it in a straight motion. And so the same thing happens with the bolt pistol. I aimed it at a wall about 10 feet away and opened fire, and I think I got maybe 2 out of 8 shots where I wanted them. This means that when you're trying to aim it like the flying guys, it's kind of luck if you hit them. I mean, you're just aiming in their general direction and praying that you hit them. And that also goes with guys charging you. As long as they're point blank, you can get them pretty good. But if they're 10, 20 feet away, chances of you actually hitting them with a kill shot are pretty low. And that's a little annoying. It's like, come on, guys, these weapons should be a little bit more accurate. And honestly, it should rely on you looking down the sights. I mean, that's the whole point of the VR, is that you can hold the gun up high enough to look right down the iron sights and put them directly on what you want to hit. And I would say that a bolt pistol should absolutely be accurate enough to save your life in those regards. That aside, I am bringing up quite a few complaints. Let's just continue with whining. The graphics, they're good. I like them. But they do look a little bit of an older generation. They're not as high quality as they could be. And that is something that I've seen some of the negative reviews say, is that it looks like a much older game than it is. Now, I don't mind that so much when it comes to VR, because quite frankly, I'd rather have it perform well than have absolutely stunning graphics. And let me tell you, nothing is more nauseating than a game stuttering in VR. Now, oddly, back when I played Fallout 4 and it was fairly new still in VR, it ran fantastic on the Vive. Now, the Vive is amazing. And I'd like to point out that back then, with all those cables, turning around 360 was not an option. The modern Quest, being completely wireless, totally allows you to turn into 360. So you don't have to stop and go, I'm literally binding myself up in cables. I need to turn back around and recenter. You don't have to do that with the Quest. And so all of the games on that have been a lot more, quite frankly, accessible. So the graphics aren't the best, but I think they're passable and they're quite a bit of fun. As far as interfacing things go, like for instance, you've got to open a door. So you got to get really close to the handle, reach out for it, and literally like hit a button to grab it and then pull it towards you. Those things could be kind of frustrating because it's hard to even tell how close you have to get. Now, if you do have enough space, you can actually walk up to it, which helps because using the joystick does help get around, but nuanced movement such as shuffling a few steps forward or even leaning make a big difference. Let's talk about some of the things I love. I actually, despite the fact that reloading occasionally is frustrating, I absolutely love it. It's so much fun to exhaust your weapon, drop the magazine and throw in another one. And when you get that cadence down, it just feels great. It's really neat that you can be firing your up and tilt your hand up and see how many bullets you've got left because there's a little display on the butt of the gun, and keep going. It's cool that you can holster it very quickly. Unfortunately, if you do it too fast or you're not exactly familiar with where you've got to go, you can drop it, and that's a little silly. But just holstering the weapon and then whipping out your sword, which is on your shoulder, it's just fun. The only thing that I think is more fun than that is I have a Star Wars game where you're using a lightsaber and you're deflecting bolts and stuff. And that was just absurd. That's like childhood dream stuff. In Battle Sister, you can deflect bullets. You can't necessarily throw them back. I didn't really figure out how it worked. I held the sword out in front of me and occasionally bullets would reflect off of the blade. But it wasn't something that I was able to do consistently, mostly because they're shooting projectiles at me and it's not exactly easy to see them coming at you. It's also hard to use the acts of faith, but when you do get them to work, they're pretty cool. Now, supposedly you can shout things like push or whatever. I didn't really get the yelling thing to work, and that might be because my microphone's not on. I have no idea. Maybe I need a different microphone, but whatever the case, it's a cool idea. It just doesn't work for me. And so, however it is, I'll definitely have to revisit it. Now, I would recommend Battle Sister for a few reasons. Number one, if you have VR, there's a lot of games that are available for it, but there aren't a ton of Warhammer games, and the Age of Sigmar one has been delisted because the company lost the license, so Battle Sister might be your only Warhammer foray for a while. And number two, I mean, it's a sister battle game. Do I wish that this was just a standard first-person shooter? Absolutely. I would already have beaten it and played it again and again because I am a huge fan of the Adeptus Sororitas. They're my army in Warhammer 40k. So I do wish that it was a less inconvenient game to play because, let's face it, VR is kind of inconvenient. You got to put it on your face. You've got to basically commit to however long you're playing it. You can't multitask. It's just, that's all you're doing. Is that a problem? Well, for someone like me who apparently has dramatic ADD and has to be doing 3 things at once, yeah, kinda. It's an interesting commitment to put that on and then do it. And plus, you can't exactly play for too long because even though I'm pretty decent with VR now, I use it for the working out apps like Supernatural. It doesn't really matter. I've got about 30, maybe 40 minutes in me before I start to either get dizzy or a little bit nauseous. And that doesn't matter if I'm keeping the motions fluid or just doing the workout. Eventually, it does take its toll. So those are some concerns to consider. Ultimately, though, I think the game is super fun. It's not the most clear about what you're supposed to be doing at any given moment, and in some cases you do get your ass beat a little bit too fast. I would have liked to see the helmet do more, like maybe give you some kind of interface. You do feel like you're wearing one because, you know, VR, but whatever. All around, I'm just going to say that I recommend Battle Sister, and you can take this as a very biased recommendation because, again, my attachment to the Adeptus Sororitas. Is it the absolute best VR game I've played? No. I think that Fallout 4 and Skyrim are actually better. There's just so much more to them. I mean, they are the actual games with all of their features and everything in them built into VR. And that's amazing, especially in Skyrim where you're like holding a sword in your left hand and throwing fireballs with your other. It's just crazy. And Battle Sister is super cool, but it isn't that sophisticated. But for $20, absolutely worth it. Interesting point, really quick. I do have the cable to run from my Quest into a computer to use it as a VR headset for Steam VR, but then I wouldn't be able to do the 360 thing. So it's kind of funny that while yes, I could be playing some more sophisticated VR games or even more games in general, it's less desirable for me because I'd be tethered. But that's more of a commentary about VR in general. So basically, I try to buy most of what I play on the Quest as opposed to through Steam. But anyway, do you play VR games? Have you tried Battle Sister? Are you a fan of these types of games in general? Just these crazy VR experiences where you're flailing around like a maniac? Let me know in the comments below and let's have a conversation. Otherwise, this is Robert with Society Case Files, signing off.